Man vs. Machine is some of the most fun I've ever had playing a video game. It's an extremely fun game mode that you can play with a group of people. You can have fun even with random people, but of course, the better the team is, the more fun you'll have. There are a lot of players who don't know which weapons work better than others. I am here today to try and help solve this problem. Now, I'm no CJ. I'm not out here doing hundreds of tours and spending hundreds on tickets. I'm just a guy who has some experience in MVM and want to share what I think are the best weapons that could help you become better. Welcome everyone to my video about the best weapons for Man vs. Machine. I'll go into detail about which weapons are good and viable, and some of which aren't worth using, with a bit of my opinion in there. I'll talk a little bit about strategies or which upgrades to purchase as well. This video is directed more towards newer players, or more experienced players who want to play other classes they aren't used to, so you know which weapons are the best for you and your team. Because the meta in normal, casual, and competitive play differs a lot from MVM. For example, the scattergun is arguably Scout's best primary, but it is completely irrelevant in MVM. On the other hand, the Brass Beast is a semi-decent option with many flaws in normal gameplay, but it's arguably Heavy's best primary in MVM. Do understand that not every class will have a strict, you must use this one weapon, nothing else meta. Every class will have multiple viable options for primary, secondary, or melee, based either on situational needs or personal preference. I will be going in reverse class order, starting with the Spy, working my way to Scout, talking a little bit about your class role and other things you may need to be aware of when playing said class, before getting into the weapons. I've decided to go in this order because that way I can get the least useful class done first, and leave the important classes for after that. There's a hierarchy for viability of classes in MVM. It goes Spy, and then everybody else, which I will explain starting now. Spy is the only class that I wouldn't recommend playing in MVM, mainly because his method of gameplay is just not as effective as anybody else's. Backstabs and zaps can help, but it's just methods that are either too niche or take too long, and you have to give up one of your classes to play Spy. If he was given a couple of buffs, just a couple, he would be as good as the others. He's always close range, always next to the robots when attacking, getting backstabs and sappers on the robots, which means he's also next to dropped money a lot. I would say giving him a money magnet, similar to Scout, will incentivize actually playing a Spy over Scout to get close. It shouldn't be as strong as Scout's magnet, given that Spy will be doing a lot of damage and prioritize that, but if Spy could help the team more effectively with money and heal off of it, it would be a big help. The other buff I'd give him is a Sapper recharge upgrade, since while his Sapper is great at stalling waves of bots, you always have to wait 15 seconds before you can use it again. It's just weird to me that it's one of the only rechargeable weapons without a recharge upgrade, so give it to him. It'll make him much more effective at slowing down waves. These couple of buffs would make Spy a much better choice to play, and so you don't end up getting kicked just for playing him. Now that I'm done with my little rant about improving Spy, let's talk about his weapons. I'm actually going to start with the watch, since his entire game plan basically revolves around his watch, and the best watch to use, by far, is the Dead Ringer. Your disguise kit is a very powerful tool in MVM. You may have heard this before, but robots will never be able to tell that you're not one of them when disguised. This removes the need for being sneaky at all, so the other watches become completely irrelevant. You just run in disguised, stab and zap as much as you can. Once the robots notice you, you Dead Ringer out of there, then wash, rinse, repeat. Even with the nerf that the Dead Ringer got where you need to wait out its entire recharge, you can still stay cloaked for not even a couple of seconds, disguise and uncloak so you don't have to wait long for your next Dead Ringer charge. For his revolver, you shouldn't really be using your gun at all, it isn't going to do much, but if you had to pick one, I'd say use the Diamondback. As long as you can do your job and stab those robots, you'll have free crits to use if you want to get a bit of damage off of a tank, or just really want to shoot some robots as your Dead Ringer charges. The L'étranger is also a really good revolver to use. It can help remedy your Dead Ringer's recharge time just by shooting robots a few times. The gimmicks on any other revolver just are not worth it. As for the knife, they actually have a few options. The Big Earner, the Kunai, and Stock are all good options. The Kunai is the worst of the three, with the Big Earner's upside being more useful for chain stabs and escapes, but it's still not a bad choice. As for the other two knives, they aren't that good. If the enemy wave has no pyros, the Spicicle is basically a stock knife, but against pyros, losing your knife basically makes you useless, and you don't need the fire resistance anyway if you're using the Dead Ringer. The Your Eternal Reward actually sucks in MVM. You may think that the instant disguise would be useful, but it would be if that were true. See, when you stab a robot, it actually takes a couple of seconds to disguise as the robot, making the upside useless. Since the robots will notice you before you disguise, and once you are disguised, they'll still know it's you for a few seconds until they just turn around and completely forget who you are. And more likely than not, you'll die in those few seconds if you don't Dead Ringer out of there. The disguise using your entire cloak meter isn't worth it either, since you then have to wait for the entire thing to recharge before you can go in and maybe not die. Just don't use this knife. Lastly, the zapper. Just use stock. I mean, there's no difference between the two zappers, so just pick one and go. Now we move on to the classes that have great uses, starting with the sniper. A good sniper can really turn the tides of the match, making sniper effectively a good stand-in for a Demoman, mainly because of the explosive headshot upgrade. But of course, you need to land those headshots. But as long as you're able to target those big robots, the explosive headshot mechanic can kill all the smaller robots, including medics. Now for sniper's weapons. The best primary for sniper is the Hitman's Heatmaker, mainly because of the focus meter. The more you upgrade your sniper rifle, the faster you keep zooming in and out when sniping, which can really be jarring and make landing headshots harder. The focus meter makes your tracking much easier to handle, since most classes have to focus on getting as much damage out there as possible. The focus meter really helps you land as many headshots as possible. The big robots won't die to just one shot, but with the focus meter, you basically have a headshotting Tomislav on steroids. Now, if you aren't very comfortable with headshots, but you still want to play sniper for damage, the Machina's extra damage capabilities and lack of a damage penalty on body shots can be more forgiving when you play. The Sydney Sleeper can be a decent alternative. The Girardi mechanic, especially the explosive Girardi headshots if you land them, can be a really big help for the rest of your team, making you more support than damage, which is good. But if you're confident in your headshots, the Heatmaker is by far the better option, and the rest of the rifles just aren't worth it. For your secondary, you have two options, which can be based on if the wave you're in has a tank or no tank. If the wave doesn't have a tank, then Girardi is the best option, since it's just a nice throwable support tool you can use as you're landing your headshots. As for the other options, they suck. The SMG has poor damage that's very situational, and all the backpack items just aren't that good. As for the waves that have a tank, the carbine is by far the best secondary, which actually ties into your melee, which is the bushwhacker. Always use the bushwhacker, no matter what. You, as a sniper, will never use your melee unless it's against spies or tanks. Spies will be dealt with using any melee, but against tanks, it's incredible. It's a meta strategy to pair these two together. Just upgrade your swing speed, rack up an easy 100 damage with the carbine, pull out the bushwhacker, and just shred that tank. Ah, the medic. A staple of your MVM team. Every team should have a medic. Your chances of winning increase exponentially with one. The right weapons can push your team to their absolute best, so you have the very important job of keeping your team alive as much as possible and boosting their damage. Let's start with the primary. This may come as a surprise to you, but the crossbow actually isn't the best primary. In fact, it's probably the worst. The problem with the crossbow is that its healing mechanic just stands out a lot less when you put it alongside your upgraded medigun and your engineer's dispenser. Your syringe guns actually have a more effective healing ability found in one of its upgrades, that being the Mad Milk on hit upgrade. Just pull out your gun, shoot a bunch of robots, or that big one, and your team benefits greatly when attacking those robots by healing, and it can heal you very quickly, especially if you use the Blutsauger. It comes down to personal preference which syringe gun you want to use. I personally use the Blutsauger the most, with the Overdose in second and the Stock is the third. But that's just me. You can pick any one of these and be fine. I just recommend not using the crossbow. For his other two weapons, there is a very defined meta for what to use. If your team is very inexperienced and dies a lot, I would say that the Vaccinator is a good minigun to use because the resistances can help your team deal with many robots, and the quick Uber charges can be used to revive teammates extremely quickly. But if your team is even quarter competent, the minigun that is absolute must to have is the Kritzkrieg. This is one of the most important weapons in MVM. You may think that the stock minigun is better because it helps your teammates not die, but there are two reasons why this argument doesn't work. Reason one is the projectile shield upgrade. Your minigun shield lasts a long time, recharges pretty quickly, and tanks all form of damage that hit it, so it can protect everything that's behind it. It is a very useful upgrade. Reason 2 is the Canteen Specialist upgrade. Use your Canteen on Uber charges to instantly Uber the person you're healing, and the best part is that you can use it in conjunction with your Kritzkrieg charge to absolutely wreak havoc. It's an amazing minigun that shouldn't be doubted at all. As for the melee, it's the Uber Saw. Yeah, I know, real original, but nothing beats Uber on hit. The best time to use this saw is when there's a sentry buster heading for your sentry. It's literally free Uber, it's not going to hit you. Other than that, you won't be using your melee too much. The Engineer is another one of those classes I think every MVM team should have, but he definitely has to put in some of the most work to be effective. Keeping your buildings up should be your number one priority, and before I get into the weapons, let me let you in on a canteen upgrade that you should invest in, and that being the building upgrade. If your buildings do end up getting destroyed, and trust me they will, use your canteen to instantly upgrade the new building you slap down, allowing you to set up your nest again as fast as possible. Just make sure you have all of your buildings now before you use it so you can maximize your charge. Of course, be aware that you are more of a backline defensive class. Your sentry shouldn't be up in the front with the rest of your team, instead a bit further back to provide extra firepower at a safe spot. Instead, keep your dispenser up at the front, while also investing in the dispenser range upgrade so that you can keep your teammates' ammo and health topped off, giving your medic a much easier time doing his job. Starting off with the weapons is the Uncle Dane approved defensive loadout, the Rescue Ranger and the Wrangler. Like I said before, keeping that gear up is your number one priority. I know how tempting it is to just run in guns blazing using your Widowmaker, or to delete projectiles using the short circuit, but you're doing your buildings and your team a bit of a disservice when you're doing those things. The Rescue Ranger of course has incredible utility, healing your buildings anywhere and pulling them away from any bad spot, and the Wrangler can keep your sentry up for a super long time. As for the wrench, if you're able to keep your buildings up as much as possible and effectively use your building upgrade canteen, your choice of wrench doesn't really matter. Any of these wrenches will be able to do the job, even the Eureka effect. Though the downsides can affect a general engineer play a little bit, you still have your Rescue Ranger, and you can still use a teleport to quickly head back to spawn and purchase more upgrades. As for the Gunslinger, I don't think I need to explain why the Gunslinger should never be used by a serious engineer. Welcome to DPS, the character. Your role in the team is as simple as it gets, just stand and shoot. You don't really need to move around much, but you do need to get a lot of damage out. And you've got two miniguns that are better than the rest at dealing damage, those being the stock minigun and the Brass Beast. Keep in mind that the minigun has no damage increase upgrade, which is weird since most primaries do have that, but since that's how it is, it limits your options a bit. All of the other miniguns are pretty lacking. The Natasha has a big damage penalty, which can't be redeemed by its slowed down upside. The Hulong Heater both has a damage penalty and eats your ammo really quickly, so it also shouldn't be used. And the Tomislav's slower firing speed makes it lackluster, especially considering the faster rev and the silent rev do not matter at all. This leaves us with the remaining two miniguns. Now, if you are confident in the ability in you and your team to just hold down one point and take out every robot that comes along, the Brass Beast will work wonders for you. But if you're one who likes to or needs to move around a little bit, the stock will be the best for you. It's really down to personal preference which one you want to use. I personally like to use stock more because I like to move around a bit, and I'm obligated to. Now for your secondary, just use a sandwich. You're barely going to need to use anything that isn't your minigun. Even though the sandwich is still the best secondary, there's next to no situations where you need to use it on yourself. Really, the only thing you should be concerned about when using your sandwich is healing your medic. He's really going to appreciate it. As for your melee, the Fists of Steel are the best for making escapes, and the Gloves of Running Urgently are the best for getting you to point A, point B when needed. These are the best melees, just don't bother using any of the other ones. Demoman has one of the most important roles in your team. It's very common to see a medic using a Kritzkrieg on a Demoman prior to the start of a wave as he sets up a sticky trap. This is one of the best methods for taking care of big robots and medic robots. Most likely, they're just going to die instantly, and if they don't, a significant amount of health will be taken away from them. It's a commonly agreed upon strategy to spend your money mainly on upgrading your secondary, since stickies have a way bigger impact than your primary. I'll get to the sticky bomb launcher of choice in a minute, but first, let's look at his primaries. It's not uncommon for demos to only use their secondaries, but there are a few good primaries you can use. The lock and load is not one of them though. The lack of rollers, the reduced clip, and the reduced explosion radius does hinder this weapon's performance. Also, the extra damage against buildings does not apply to robots, so keep that in mind. For the remaining launchers, you have Stock and the Iron Bomber. Not bad choices at all. The rollers and the better explosion radiuses from both launchers can make them better, but in my opinion, the best launcher to use is the Loose Cannon. The knockback from the bombs can actually be great utility. It can help stop waves of big robots in their tracks, or knock bomb-carrying robots into death pits, which is another common strategy I'll get into in a little bit. Demos using the booties is common if they tend to use only the sticky launcher, since the extra health can be more useful than a primary launcher depending on who you ask. I personally like to use the primaries more. Now for the secondary. Enter the Scottish Resistance. This weapon is absolutely a god tier weapon. The amount of versatility you have with being able to have multiple traps you can use at separate times, and the amount of damage you can deal with a full set of 14 crit charge stickies is absolutely insane. This is not to be taken lightly. This weapon will absolutely demolish anything in its way. It is the ultimate defensive weapon for the Demoman, but that's not to say it's the only good one. Stock is a really good choice for secondary as well, since while it doesn't have the same defensive capabilities as the Scottish Resistance, it still does sticky traps very well and is quite a bit more versatile for burst damage, especially for faster paced waves. The other secondaries aren't as good. The Quickie Bomb launcher isn't good enough, the sticky launcher is... yeah. And don't even look at the shields. Please, if you're playing MVM in any serious capacity, never use the shields, and just never play Demo Knight. The melee should be basically anything that has no negative bonuses. The Persian Persuader's less ammo penalty obviously makes it useless, Caber isn't useful, Pain Train isn't useful, the Claymore isn't useful, and the Half Zatoichi is useful, since health shouldn't really be much of an issue. If you do need to use your melee for close range damage, the Skull Cutter and Stock are good options. I personally like to use the Island to get some easy kills on small robots to get health and speed, but it's a riskier and overall less effective melee than just using Stock. It's amazing to see how far that Pyro has come since the beginning of MVM. Pyro used to be that one super niche class that nobody really saw as useful, as Heavy could basically do Pyro's DPS job better, even if you were using the Flog or the Backburner. And anything else Pyro had just didn't stack up to the other classes. But then, a certain weapon came out, which is what I'm going to talk about first. The one secondary that changed the view on the Pyro forever. The Thermal Thrust, the Gas Passer. This weapon single-handedly made Pyro viable. Yes, there was Air Blast. Yes, there was... well, that's all there was. But now with this, you basically have a throwable sticky trap thanks to the Explode on Ignite upgrade. I am exaggerating a little bit by saying that the Gas Passer carries the Pyro, but it's pretty much the most effective secondary that Pyro has. Pyro, like Sniper, can actually be a good stand-in for a demo if you use the Gas Passer effectively, and let's be real, it's pretty difficult not to. Even after the nerf that made it so that the explosion doesn't count towards the recharge, it's still an incredibly useful damage tool. So good in fact, that I would say that the Explode on Ignite upgrade should always be your first purchase if you're playing Pyro. It's that good. If you want to focus more on delaying waves, the Scorch Shot is actually a really good alternative to the Gas Passer. For the Flamethrower, the best options you have are Stock, the Flog, and the Backburner. Again, picking between these is more based on personal preference. The Decreaser's faster switch speed basically doesn't matter at all, especially considering the lower fire damage and the fact that flares and comboing aren't as effective as the Gas Passer. The Dragon's Fury isn't a bad choice when dealing with singular targets like big robots or tanks, but it's not very effective against big waves of robots. When looking at our good flamethrowers, you need to decide between Air Blast and Damage. Air Blast on the stock helps with dealing with projectiles and resetting bombs. Like I said back when I was talking about the loose cannon, resetting the bomb is a very viable strategy, and it works best with the Pyro. Most MVM maps have at least one instant death pit you can fall into, and what pushing the bomb carrier into those pits does is reset the bomb, completely halting the enemy's objective. If they get to the drop-off point with no bomb, they can't really do anything. Resetting the bomb sends the bomb all the way back to the starting point, as the robots will have to make their entire journey again. This buys you a lot more time to kill off any robots that may be of issue. As for damage with the Flog, it just makes you an incredible DPS class. It may take quite a bit of time to get your oomph meter filled to its max, but when you do, you'll be killing any robots in your way, and you'll be doing some crazy damage against tanks. The Backburner's crit damage from the back can be great against big robots, and you still have a couple of air blasts to use for bomb resets and projectile reflecting, but the back crits don't really help against tanks. You can pick any of these primaries and be successful, it just depends on what you like and what your team may need. For the melee, this choice doesn't matter so much since you're Pyro. Use the power jack to get to places sooner, or if your engineer is getting overrun by spies, the homewrecker could be of great use. The most well-rounded, one of the most important characters in MVM. The Soldier does wonders, both in damage and in support. Soldier feels the most like he can just go off and do his own thing, but you also have a big role in support, so you're going to have to stick with your team as much as you can. This makes rocket jumping not as important in MVM, since you don't want to stay away from your team and attack in the air, but of course, going back to spawn to buy upgrades or making escapes is always welcomed when needed. Starting with the primary, there's quite a bit you can pick from, so I'm going to narrow down the choices. The Liberty Launch's reduced damage really holds it back, so it's not a good weapon. The direct hit's severe lack of splash also hurts its performance, even if the increased damage seems useful. If you only have to deal with a tank, you can use it, but other than that, it's not that good. The airstrike promotes a lot of rocket jumping, and a lot of risky gameplay, which I said earlier isn't something you want to do, even if spamming rockets is appealing to you, otherwise it's just a straight downgrade. And then there's the rocket jumper, which just don't, please. The Cow Mangler is only good in the first wave. The infinite ammo and charge shot can be of great help when the game is just starting out and your team doesn't really have much, but once you get to wave 2, maybe wave 3, and when you and your team start buying upgrades, the support from your team and the inability for the Cow Mangler to do crits far outweigh the upsides. Remember that the charge shot uses all of your ammo, even if you upgraded it to have a larger clip. The rocket launcher and the original are the best launchers to use in general. It has all the right balances to be the most reliable. The black box's healing mechanic can be useful if your team isn't that great at getting heals out, but if your medic and dispenser are keeping you alive, the black box basically becomes stock with one less rocket. Upgrades on this thing basically make it a straight upgrade, so yeah. But once you start getting to later waves and you start having a lot of money, may I recommend the Beggar's Bazooka. Using it in early waves isn't very practical, it takes a while to reload, and you don't really have that element of surprise you have in normal play that can make this weapon great. But once you get to later waves, it becomes a beast. Just run into battle, load up all of your rockets, and just go. You basically become the heavy, both rockets, and it's super fun, as well as extremely effective. Try it out, you won't regret it. For the secondary, a less experienced team that doesn't stay alive very well may benefit from the battalion's backup, which really does just help you and your team stay alive longer. But if you have a good enough team that knows what they're doing, the buff banner is by far the best secondary. It really boosts your team's damage output significantly. This is why you should stick with your team, so everyone can benefit from your banner. All of the other secondaries just aren't as useful. Picking your melee is just as simple as what you would use in normal play. The escape plan and the disciplinary action are the good ones to use. You may think that the Market Gardener is a good one to use, but again, don't keep rocket jumping around to kill, it's just not very effective. And finally, we have the fast bossing boy himself. I see Scout as another must-have in your MVM team because he has the extremely important job that nobody else even comes close to doing as well as the Scout, which is collecting money. Sure, you may be an offensive class, but you are a dedicated support class in MVM. As a result, damage isn't your job, because Scout is probably the worst at dealing damage out of any of the classes in MVM. This makes picking a primary be more based on utility rather than damage. This means that the backscatter and the stock scattergun are off the table, since they mainly focus on damage. The Babyface's blaster has a promising speed buff, but given how much you get shot in MVM and how important double jumping is, it's worthless. The remaining primaries are the ones you want to be looking at. They each do their jobs a bit differently, but all of them offer great utility. The Soda Popper's height meter is amazing for getting you over huge hordes of robots who can go collect money. It is a bit less convenient to use this weapon nowadays, since running to gain hype isn't a thing anymore, but it's still a very solid choice and one I like to use the most. The shortstop shove mechanic can be used to reset the bomb if your team doesn't have a Pyro, and that can be great to have considering the amount of mobility you have in the first place. The Force in Nature is sort of the middle ground for both of the other primaries, as its knockback can give you some extra mobility when moving around the map and can be used to reset the bomb, but you do have to be careful when the bomb is being carried by smaller robots, since you risk just killing them when trying to knock them into pits. You have two choices for the secondary. Bach Atomic Punch is pretty good in earlier waves when you have fewer resistances and you need to be safer when collecting money. But as the game goes on, the second choice, the Mad Milk, quickly becomes the best secondary, just because of how useful its healing ability is for you and your team, and how the slow down when wet upgrade can buy you a lot more time when dealing with giant scouts. You also have two choices for melee. The Fan of War is a very solid melee to use for support, since marking robots for death can be extremely useful when focusing down big robots. The Sandman is the later wave alternative to the Fan of War. The ball can be used to mark opponents for death, letting you do everything you need to do at a safe distance, but you do need to spend 500 credits to give your ball this ability, and regardless of which melee you use, you can only mark one opponent for death at a time. This concludes my list of the most useful weapons for man vs. machine. I hope you found this video informative and helpful for selecting the weapons that best suit the class you want to play. I base my selection criteria on both personal preferences and by referencing this Two Cities guide by Carnage. Though this list is a bit outdated since the last update was done prior to the Jungle Inferno update, it was still a very useful reference for helping me decide how I wanted to formulate my choices. If you guys would like me to do a video going more in depth about strategies or upgrades, do let me know. With that being said, I hope you guys have a great day and go have some fun playing MVM. Please, it's just a great game mode all around.